Welcome back everyone to Hearts of Iron 4, and today we are here to ask a simple question. Is the new DLC Death and Dishonor actually worth the price? So let's jump right into it. Death or Dishonor is actually not a full-fledged DLC, but a country pack, which focuses on the countries caught between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union during World War II. Faced with the tough choices of either starting a conflict with the major powers, of course, or compromising a deal for their own survival, essentially Death or Dishonor. It adds 4 new national focus trees for Romania, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, new music and flavor content, voiceovers for the 4 countries, and of course new gameplay mechanics, although it's only equipment conversions and production licenses. So does it actually accomplish the aim of improving the gameplay experience? Well, at least for the 4 nations that actually get focus tree, it does. But its more ambitious goal of immersing the player in a fluid and essentially cutthroat world of international relations and politics of Eastern Europe on the road to World War II, no, it does not. It's not even entirely its fault, to be fair. The new national focus trees are generally well made, and they offer quite meaningful choices the player has to make regarding to how best to prepare for the war. For example, Yugoslavia has to unite its nationalities into a stable and resilient state. Czechoslovakia has to choose between trying to grow its prosperous industry or spending a lot of time building fortifications to protect itself from Germany. Romania has to deal with its weird king that really likes to party, and its precarious strategic position, so it can change allies quite quickly. And of course, Hungary needs to contend with the unresolved issues of its borders and the Trianon Treaty after the Great War. However, because of the lack of meaningful diplomatic features in Hearts of Iron 4 and the absence of any improvement in this field by the DLC Death and Dishonor, because it's only a country pack and not a content DLC, it falls short of providing a challenging and dynamic experience. Instead, the player sort of always picks one side, just like if it were a normal game of Hearts of Iron 4, one side or the other of the war, and then can simply just roll over the weak AI when the time comes to fight and actually win the war. Also aided by the fact that the new 4 new countries actually have generals that sometimes are better than those of the great powers, which doesn't really make all that much sense. Because of the lack of this sort of diplomatic game, any meaningful diplomatic features, just like in other Paradox titles like Victoria or European Universalis, you really can't engage in diplomacy with anyone that isn't the big three, Germany, the Soviet Union, and sometimes Great Britain. In, for example, border disputes, negotiations, intrigues, different various political crises that characterize regional politics of the Eastern Europe region and the Balkans in the 1930s. For example, you don't have the option to negotiate treaties regulating borders or the rearmament of Hungary, even though, you know, those were pretty important issues of the time, or at least in any, well, sometimes you can do it, but you cannot ever do it in any dynamic way. It's always either, oh, this guy accepts, this guy doesn't, and that's determined randomly by events. You cannot try to also bring in, for example, the great powers to broker favorable conditions because of the absence of said diplomacy. For example, broker favorable conditions in disputes, and so you have to rely on, oftentimes, just complete, outright, ridiculous war, essentially total war between various different minor countries for disputes that are supposed to be over small regions. So it really doesn't make all that much thematic sense either. Or you're relying on the AI to actually go on the initiative and trigger events like the Vienna Awards, or for example sometimes the Soviet Union very rarely tries to do something, and sometimes the UK tries to intervene in the Balkans, but it's always very, very clunky. It doesn't really help that of the big three, Germany is the one that's by far the most active player, and only the one that's basically the only active threat, because the sort of historic historical panic over the USSR that swept throughout the region, and of course the Soviet expansionism that did provoke that panic and pushed all these nations towards Germany historically and politically, and sometimes the United Kingdom. It really doesn't exist because the USSR rarely attempts to expand, and even if it does so, it's incredibly incompetent, so it's also not really much of a threat. So if you're playing something like an Axis Romania or Hungary, the gameplay experience can be very, very dull because it's essentially relying on you just getting an alliance of Germany and then going and steamrolling the Soviets. Even Germany doesn't really provide enough of a challenge because, and that's actually kind of historically accurate, its terrible strategic position just makes Germany really underpowered. Because if you have a player controlling Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, you can just easily hunker down in your territory with some fortifications, let Germany be sandwiched between you and your allies. So for example, if you have allied with the Soviet Union, you can wait, fortifying up your border areas, trying to draw as many German troops as possible to you, and then the Soviets will be easily able to win on the Eastern Front. And of course, Germany's AI will get into a conflict with the Western allies as well, and then it's going to be completely crushed from all sides. So of course, this really does not help with putting the player into a situation where they can either choose death or dishonor, because it's really, really rare that you're actually going to be in danger, even though that's the whole point of the DLC, to make you be compromising to save your own nation. So this sort of leads to situations like, for example, I played through Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and Austria-Hungary, and in those playthroughs I decided to go up against Germany and fight it, and I defeated them without any particular exploits or exploity strategy, gamey tactics, without really being an excellent player myself. So this was really kind of disappointing in a way. Onto the good stuff. The license production mechanic is actually pretty functional and good, so that is great. It allows more technologically backward nations that may have, for example, good friendships with some of the great powers to get some pretty decent equipment and being able to produce it and catch up without that being too immersion breaking or unrealistic. And the soundtrack is also pretty damn good. The new pieces, I believe there's like 3 or 4, they're pretty nice. I like them. So overall, Death or Dishonor, sorry. I always make that mistake. It does fall short of actually forcing the player to choose and try to compromise. But it's not the worst possible DLC for something like 10 euros. However, because of all the issues with the base Hearts of Iron 4 game, this is pretty important because many of the flaws of Death and Dishonor actually come from Hearts of Iron 4 and its problems. So because of many of its flaws, and also because of the presence of mods that essentially end up offering a similar gameplay experience, because Death and Dishonor doesn't really add any new mechanics, and adding new focus trees and events is all well and good, but modders can do the same, and they can do it pretty damn well. So because of the presence of similar mods that are free, of course, and also because of some particularly ridiculous things that can be kind of described as fan service, for example, the ability to restore Austria-Hungary, which is pretty ridiculous. All this sort of comes around and means that Death or Dishonor probably isn't worth the 10 euros asking price unless you particularly like the countries of the DLC. Even though the national focus trees are good, sometimes they also kind of shoot themselves in the foot. For example, the Yugoslavian one has a pretty awesome little system where you have national spirits that determine the sort of weaknesses of the state due to the national minorities. And if you're going with the sort of status quo, quote-unquote, branch of the focus tree, then you have to compromise between the various different ethnicities, try to balance out sort of their influence, and of course that leads, or try to of course crush them, which leads to sometimes civil wars, etc. But if you're going, for example, with the Federal Socialist Republic, the communist tree, you can just select one focus tree and it essentially cancels out all the negatives without any downsides. So why go to the lengths of actually providing a meaningful choice and progression for one part of the focus tree when another part of the focus tree doesn't really have that? I just don't really know why that would be the case. Also, for example, Czechoslovakia has an option to become a puppet of Germany and sort of try to expand under its wing, but it does not have the same option for becoming a Soviet satellite, for example, or a French puppet state. It's just weird how they decided to sort of do this asymmetry sometimes, and it really doesn't end up working out in favor of the DLC. So yeah, I want to thank y'all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.